Out of the car, now. The officer didn't wait. He pulled the door open before Adaeze Okonkwo had even finished unbuckling her seatbelt, grabbed her by the upper arm, and walked her backward into the side of her own vehicle. Her shoulder hit the cold steel with a dull thud. The Tim Hortons cup she'd been holding fell and rolled under the car, spilling coffee across the wet asphalt. "Show me what's in that bag." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She held very still and watched Constable Gary Merritt reach into her canvas tote and pull out the envelope. White, letter-sized, her sister's name written on the front in blue ink. He opened it without asking, counted the bills with his thumb the way someone counts a poker hand. $400, cash. He folded the envelope once and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Suspected proceeds of crime. Highway Traffic Act, Section 48. You can dispute it. He said this the way someone reads a nutrition label. No eye contact, already walking back to his cruiser. She stood on the gravel shoulder of Highway 26 in Grey County, Ontario, in the rain, watching the taillights of his cruiser flicker as he sat there for another 4 minutes doing nothing. 3 cars passed. Nobody slowed down. He had been doing this for 11 years. Had hundreds of stops on that same stretch of road, the same script, the same tone, and not once had anything happened to him for it. But this time, Constable Gary Merritt had stopped the wrong woman. Let's go back. Not to the stop. We'll get there. But to the morning before everything changed. Adaeze Okonkwo woke up at 6:10 without an alarm. Her body had kept that schedule for 22 years, through 2 provinces, 1 marriage, 3 different offices, and a career that most people in her field spent a lifetime trying to reach. She made tea in the kitchen. Rooibos, no sugar. The spoon sat on the counter. She didn't stir, she just let it steep. Her house was quiet. A 2-story in Owen Sound, brick exterior, a back porch that needed restaining. The neighbors thought she was a retired teacher. She had never corrected them. Adaeze was 53 years old. She had a daughter in Toronto named Yemi, who called every Sunday without fail. She drove a gray Subaru Outback, with a scratch on the rear bumper from a parking garage in Sudbury 4 years ago. She kept her identification in a flat leather case in the inner pocket of her coat, not her wallet and not her bag. She was the Deputy Director of the Office of the Independent Police Review Director for Ontario. Her job, specifically, was to investigate officers who committed crimes while in uniform: theft, assault, evidence planting, racial profiling, abuse of public trust. She had built cases that ended careers and sent constables to federal prison. She had sat in rooms with police chiefs and told them things they didn't want to hear, and she had not flinched once. She didn't bring it up at dinner. She didn't put her title on her license plate frame or her email signature outside of official correspondence. If you sat next to her on the ferry from Tobermory, you'd see a tall black woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a book she wasn't quite getting through. Nothing more. That's what made her dangerous, not the office, the quiet. She had taken the drive to Collingwood that Friday to see her sister Chiamaka, who had recently moved there after a divorce that had taken 2 years and most of her energy to get through. Adaeze had made jollof rice in a sealed container the night before, packed it with a bottle of wine and an envelope of cash. $400. Not a loan, a gift. The kind of thing you do for a sister when you don't want to make it complicated. She called Yemi from the car before she got on the highway. "I'm taking 26 through Grey County, stopping at Chica's place, then heading back tonight." Yemi's voice tightened just slightly on the other end. "Mom, you know what that stretch is like." She did know. Everyone who drove that corridor knew. There was a constable stationed along the 26 corridor who had been pulling over black drivers for years. The stories moved through community WhatsApp groups and church basements and the Tim Hortons on 10th Street. A man who took your cash and told you it was procedure, who wrote receipts with names spelled wrong, who invented smells and manufactured reasons and dared you to prove otherwise. She'd heard his name, Gary Merritt. She hadn't opened a file on him yet. Rumors weren't evidence. They were starting points. She told Yemi she'd be fine. She put on the radio and drove. The rain started around 4:30. Light at first, then steady. The kind of Grey County autumn rain that makes the fields look like someone left them out overnight. She had her headlights on and both hands on the wheel, doing exactly the speed limit when she saw the lights in her rearview mirror. Blue and red, strobing. Her hands tightened on the wheel just for a second, and then she let them relax. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. She had learned this from her mother, who had learned it from her mother before that. The way you train your body not to give fear any surface to grip. She signaled, eased onto the gravel shoulder, killed the engine. The cruiser sat behind her for almost 3 minutes without moving, just the lights spinning in the rain. She watched in her rear view. One officer, driver's side door finally opened. Constable Gary Merritt was a wide man, not tall, the kind of wide that comes from years of sitting in a cruiser, mid-50s, a gray mustache that he kept too long. He walked toward her car without hurrying, like a man who had never once been late for anything because everything waited for him. He reached her window and didn't lean down. He stood upright and aimed his flashlight directly at her face, even though the cruiser's lights were doing plenty. License and registration. No greeting, no badge number, no reason for the stop. She squinted against the beam and kept her voice level. Good evening. Can you tell me the reason for this stop? He didn't answer. He held the light steady. License, registration. She narrated out loud as she reached for the glove compartment. The way you're taught. The way every black driver in Canada learns at some point, usually from someone older, usually after something has already happened. I'm reaching into my glove compartment for my registration. My license is in my coat pocket. She handed both documents through the window. He took them without looking at them. Where are you going? Collingwood, visiting family. He repeated the word like it meant something suspicious. Collingwood. He walked to the front of the car, looked at her plates, walked back slowly. She watched his boots on the wet gravel in her side mirror. These plates registered? Yes. Long way to come on a Friday night. What do you do? I work for the province. He didn't respond to that. He went back to his cruiser for 4 minutes. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the rain streak down the windshield. Behind the rearview mirror, mounted on a small magnetic bracket she'd installed herself, a dashcam blinked its red light. Always on. A habit she'd picked up years ago, around the time a complaint came across her desk from a teacher in Barrie who lost $600 on a rainy Friday night and spent 2 years trying to get anyone to listen. Merritt came back. His voice had shifted, flatter, the voice of a decision already made. Step out of the vehicle. Can you tell me the reason? I'm detecting the odor of cannabis coming from your vehicle. She paused. Not from surprise, from recognition. She had read that exact phrase in 47 different complaints over the past 8 years. There was no cannabis. There had never been cannabis. Adaze didn't use it. Her car smelled like wet wool and the jollof rice in the back seat. She unfastened her seatbelt and stepped out onto the gravel. The rain hit her shoulders immediately. She stood beside the car and kept her posture neutral, her hands visible, her face unreadable. I don't consent to a search. The words came out the way she meant them. Calm, documented, said for the dashcam, not for him. Merritt looked at her the way he had probably looked at 200 people before her, as a transaction, as an inconvenience that was about to become profitable. Hands on the hood. She placed her palms flat on the wet metal. Cold worked into her fingers immediately. He reached into her canvas bag without asking, found the envelope, opened it, counted the bills. This is a lot of cash. It's a gift for my sister. He folded the envelope and put it in his jacket. He wrote something on a pad against the roof of her car, handed her a slip of paper with her name spelled Adaezeokonwo. Missing the first K, missing it deliberately, she suspected. She'd seen this before, too. Misspelled receipts were harder to search in the system. Suspected proceeds of crime. You have 30 days to file a dispute. He set it to the air above her head. That's not drug money. You know that. He stepped closer. She could smell the coffee on his breath and something underneath it that she couldn't name but recognized. The smell of someone who had never been held accountable for anything. What I know is that you're on my road with $400 cash and a car that smells like cannabis. What I know is that you're either walking away from this tonight or you're not. Your choice. She said nothing. She picked up her bag from the gravel where he'd set it down. She got back into her car. He stood at her window and held her license over the door frame and dropped it. It landed in the wet gravel beside the rear tire. She opened the door, picked it up, sat back down. He tapped the roof twice with his palm. Move along. She drove exactly the speed limit for the next 6 kilometers, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Behind the rearview mirror, the red light blinked steadily. She pulled off onto a side road near the Beaver Valley turnoff, parked under a row of maples that cut the rain slightly. She turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the number she knew from memory. Ontario OPRD After Hours Intake Line. This is Deputy Director Adeze Okonkwo, employee number 1147. I'm initiating an urgent complaint and requesting a priority investigation. I need Detective Sergeant Calvin Ademi assigned. I need a full records pull on Constable Gary Merritt, Gray County OPP. Every stop record, every proceeds of crime receipt, every complaint filed against him in the past 12 years. I want it on my desk by 7 a.m., and I need to formally note that I have dashcam footage of this entire encounter, audio and video. Silence on the line. Then, understood, Deputy Director. I'll flag it now. She hung up, sat with her hands in her lap for another minute, looked out at the rain. Then she called Yemi, told her she'd be a bit late. Didn't say why. Didn't need to. Yemi heard it in her voice anyway. Mom, are you okay? I will be. She drove to Chiamaka's house, stayed for 2 hours, ate rice, drank half a glass of wine, let her sister talk about the new apartment and the night classes she'd started. Didn't say a word about the stop. She drove home in the rain. Calvin Adeyemi was already at the building when she arrived at 7 the next morning. He'd been there since 6. 15 years with the OIPRD's investigations unit, known for being the kind of investigator who finished things. He had the files spread across the table in the small conference room off the main floor. What they found made Adeze set down her tea and not pick it up again. Constable Gary Merritt had conducted over 720 traffic stops on the Gray County stretch of Highway 26 over the past 11 years. 720 documented stops. The racial breakdown was stark. 79% of the drivers stopped were black or racialized minorities, in a corridor where the permanent resident population was over 90% white. Proceeds of crime receipts tied to his stops totaled just over $380,000. No charges ever laid, no drugs ever entered into evidence from any of his stops, not once in 11 years. And the complaints, there were 51 of them, filed by drivers from Owen Sound, Barrie, Toronto, Brampton, Windsor. People who had driven up for Thanksgiving or Wasaga Beach or a funeral or a job interview and come home $300 lighter and angrier than they'd ever been in their lives. Every single complaint had passed through the desk of Sergeant Howard Brock, the detachment's complaints supervisor. Everyone had been logged, reviewed, and returned marked no further action warranted. Not investigated, logged, marked, filed. Ademi pulled up the individual files on his laptop, and Adeze read them one by one. The language was different, the people were different, the years were different, but the story was always the same. He said he smelled cannabis. There was no cannabis. He took the money from my center console and said it was evidence. He told me if I made a complaint, he'd remember my plates. I filed a complaint. No one called me back. I filed another one. No one called me back. One name appeared 4 times across 6 years. Bernard Asante, a personal support worker from Barrie who drove the 26 corridor twice a month to visit his mother in Meaford. Merritt had stopped him 4 times, taken cash twice, total removed $1,100. Bernard had filed complaints after each stop involving money. All 4 had been marked no further action. Ademi called Bernard that afternoon. When he told him that a formal investigation had been opened, Bernard went quiet for long enough that Ademi thought the call had dropped. Then Bernard said, I told everyone. I told my supervisor. I told my MP's office. I told a lawyer who said it wasn't worth pursuing. I told my mother's care coordinator because I thought maybe they'd believe a white woman saying it happened. He stopped. Nobody did anything. We're doing something now, Ademi said. Within 72 hours, a Daisy's team had 44 individuals willing to speak on record. 44 people, same stretch of highway, same constable, same script, different names, different years, different amounts, same experience of standing on wet gravel, watching someone in uniform take things from them and smile. A Daisy sent the case simultaneously to the Crown's office in Owen Sound, the Ontario Provincial Police Professional Standards Bureau, and the RCMP's National Civil Rights Unit. She wasn't keeping this local. Sergeant Brock's connections in the detachment were well known, and she had not built a career by being naive about how files disappeared. Merritt was still on the road. He didn't know what was coming. It happened on a Tuesday morning, clear sky, cold enough for a frost on the fields. Merritt was in his usual spot, a pull-off behind a stand of birch trees on the 26, radar on the dash, coffee going. He'd already run 2 stops that morning. Neither had produced anything worth keeping. He was watching a blue minivan and deciding whether it was worth the paperwork when a black SUV appeared in his mirror and pulled in behind him. Then another. Then an unmarked OPP sedan. He frowned. Detective Sergeant Calvin Adiemi stepped out of the first vehicle. 2 RCMP officers stepped out of the second. They walked toward him without hurrying. No drama, just forward motion. Adiemi knocked on his window. Constable Merritt, please step out of the vehicle. Merritt stepped out. He looked at the 3 of them with the expression of a man who had spent 11 years believing the rules bent around him and was now encountering gravity for the first time. What's this about? Adiemi held out a folded document. This is a warrant for your arrest. Charges include theft under color of right, breach of trust, fabrication of evidence, filing false reports, and systemic violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Sections 8, 9, and 15. Merritt stared at the paper.
This is a mistake.
I've been with the OPP for 19 years. Adiemi nodded. We know. One of the RCMP officers stepped forward. Turn around, please, Constable. Now just hold on. Who filed this? Who?
Turn around.
The handcuffs clicked in the cold air. The sound carried across the empty road like something breaking that had been about to break for a very long time. They drove him to the detachment in Owen Sound and put him in an interview room he had walked past 1,000 times. Adiemi set up a laptop on the table and pressed play. The dashcam footage ran for 41 minutes. Merritt's voice, Adizi's silence, the flashlight aimed at her face, the envelope removed from her bag and placed inside his jacket, the receipt written on the roof of her car, her license dropped on the wet gravel. Merritt watched himself on screen. The color went out of his face the way heat leaves a room when a window is left open in November. Slow, and then all at once. He tried denial first. That footage has been edited. The angle is misleading.
Then minimization.
Civil forfeiture is a legal tool. Every officer in Grey County uses this protocol.
Then blame.
She was acting evasive. The bag was in plain sight. I had reasonable grounds. Then bargaining. I have 19 years on that detachment without a major complaint. Adiemi let him finish. Then he said, 44 victims on record, 720 documented stops, 79% racial disparity, $380,000 in proceeds of crime receipts with 0 subsequent charges laid, and 41 minutes of video showing you take money from a woman's bag and drop her license in the rain. Merritt's mouth moved. Nothing came out. His badge was removed. His service weapon was taken. He was processed and moved to holding. That afternoon, Sergeant Howard Brock was called into the detachment commander's office. When he walked in, 2 investigators from the Professional Standards Bureau were already seated. They had his emails, the ones where complaints had been forwarded to him with highlighted sections, and he had replied with a single line. Reviewed. No action required. 41 times. He tried the same defense Merritt had tried. Protocol, volume, resource constraints. You received 51 complaints about one constable on one stretch of road over 11 years, the investigator said. You buried all of them. Brock's office was sealed. His computer was removed. He was suspended pending criminal charges of obstruction and breach of public trust. Merritt's partner of 3 years, Constable Jeff Taves, was brought in separately. He sat in a chair in a room 2 doors down from Merritt and looked at his hands for a long time.
Had.
When Adiemi asked if he wanted to cooperate, he said yes immediately, like he'd been waiting for someone to ask.
Had.
He gave them everything, every stop he'd witnessed, every time Merritt reached into his own jacket to produce evidence that hadn't come from any vehicle. Every time he'd stood at the passenger side and said nothing because he was 26 years old and new to the detachment and Merritt had 19 years and the commander called him by his first name. Every time he drove away from a shoulder on the 26, knowing what had just happened. I told myself it was legal, Taves said. Civil forfeiture is technically legal. I told myself that. He paused. I knew it wasn't right. He signed a full cooperation agreement in exchange for reduced charges, 2 years probation, community service, permanent separation from policing. The dashcam footage ran on every Ontario news channel by Thursday evening. The clip that looped most often was 11 seconds long. Merritt standing at a Daze's window, the license held over the doorframe, the small deliberate release, the license falling to the wet gravel. That 11-second clip was screenshotted and shared more than 40,000 times in the first weekend. The face of a man who had spent 11 years believing the road was his. The trial began on a Wednesday morning in March at the Grey County Courthouse in Owen Sound. Provincial Court Judge the Honorable Sandra Whitmore presiding. The gallery was full. Local reporters in the first 3 rows, national press in the back, a CBC camera crew in the hallway. Adizo Okonkwo sat in the gallery, 4th row, in the same coat she'd worn the night of the stop. She did not speak to any reporters. She had given one statement to the OIPRD's communications office and declined everything after that. The Crown built its case on 4 pillars: the dashcam footage, the data analysis, the financial audit, and the victims.
They played the footage first, 41 minutes.
The jury watched in silence. 12 people. Not one of them looked away.
Then the data.
A forensic analyst walked through the numbers on a projector screen. Stop rates by race broken out by year. Proceeds of crime receipts cross-referenced with provincial drug charge records, which showed 0 corresponding charges from Merritt stops in 11 years. The analyst's summary was one sentence. This was not enforcement. This was extraction. Then the financial audit. $383,000 moved through Grey County OPP's proceeds of crime account over 11 years attributable to Merritt's stops. The audit showed where it went. Operational budget, equipment fund, a detachment vehicle purchase in 2021, money taken from drivers on a rural highway at night and laundered through county administration into departmental spending. Then the victims. Bernard Asante testified on a Thursday afternoon. He wore a blue tie. He kept his hands flat on the railing of the witness box. He described the first stop. A Saturday in September, 7 years earlier. He was driving back from Meaford after spending the afternoon with his mother, who had been in a care home for 2 years by then with advancing dementia. He had $600 in his wallet, money he'd earned doing overnight shifts that month. Merritt pulled him over, said he smelled cannabis, found the wallet during a search, removed $400, wrote a receipt. Bernard filed a complaint the following Monday. Nothing happened. 4 months later, Merritt stopped him again.
Same road.
Same time of evening, same statement about cannabis. This time he took $700. Bernard's voice was steady until he said, "My mother didn't know where she was by then. She didn't always know who I was, but she knew when I visited. She could feel it," the care workers said. "So I went every week, until I couldn't afford the gas and the tolls and the parking and still eat." He looked down at his hands. "I stopped going as often because I couldn't afford to drive that road anymore." The courtroom did not make a sound. 5 more victims testified over the following days. A retired nurse from Brampton who had been stopped twice in 1 month. A university student whose entire month's rent had been taken 3 years ago and who still worked 2 jobs to cover the debt he'd taken on after. A 58-year-old machinist from Barrie who described sitting on the shoulder of the 26 in the dark after Merritt left, counting what remained of a week's pay and calling his wife to say he didn't know how they'd make it to Friday. Merritt's defense tried everything. They argued training gaps. that civil forfeiture policy had been poorly communicated across the detachment. They argued systemic factors, that Merritt operated in an environment where these practices were implicitly endorsed. They argued the dashcam footage was one moment in a career of 19 years and should be weighed accordingly. Judge Whitmore shut the footage argument down in 7 words. The recording shows what it shows, clearly. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. They came back on a Monday morning, guilty on all counts. Merritt gripped the edge of the defense table when it was read. His legs didn't buckle, but they thought about it. For the first time in the entire trial, he looked like a man who had run out of room. Judge Whitmore delivered the sentence 9 days later. She spoke for 13 minutes before the number. You were given a badge and a sworn duty to protect every person on the roads of this province without distinction. Instead, you used that badge to identify targets. You used a legal mechanism as a weapon. You chose your victims by race, and you counted on their powerlessness to protect you. 44 people found the courage to speak. This court intends to make certain they are heard. 14 years federal. No parole eligibility for 8. Full restitution to all identified victims. Complete and permanent prohibition from any law enforcement role in Canada. The doors of the courthouse closed behind him. Sergeant Howard Brock was charged separately. Obstruction of justice, breach of trust, criminal negligence in the performance of duty. He was terminated. His pension clawed back pending the outcome of his trial, which was scheduled for the following autumn. Constable Taves fulfilled his cooperation agreement. He left the OPP within a month and, as far as anyone at the detachment knew, left Grey County entirely. The OPP Provincial Command was ordered by the Ontario Civilian Oversight Authority to implement mandatory reforms within 90 days. Dashcams on every cruiser in the province tamper-proof with automatic upload. Any stop where the camera is not running is inadmissible for any proceeds of crime action. An independent complaints body with the power to compel production of records separate from the detachment structure. Mandatory publication of all traffic stop data broken down by race every quarter. A prohibition on proceeds of crime funds flowing into operational budgets without independent audit. The reform document cited a Daisy's case 16 times. She gave one interview, a radio segment on CBC Ontario, 7 minutes, recorded in her office. I had the authority and the tools to do what I did that night. I knew how to make a complaint that would actually land. I knew who to call and what to say and how to document it. Most of the people Gary Merritt stopped didn't have any of that. That's not justice. Justice would be a system where what happened to Bernard Asante is treated the same way it was treated when it happened to me. We are not there. We have to keep building toward it. 6 months later, Adizi drove the same road. Highway 26, Grey County, late afternoon in April. The fields on either side still brown from winter, just beginning to go soft at the edges with green. The birch trees where Merritt used to park were there. The pull-off was there. No cruiser behind them. No lights in her mirror. She drove past the spot where she had pulled onto the shoulder, past the flat stretch where she had stood in the rain and watched a man in uniform take something from her bag and tell her it was legal. She drove past it at exactly the speed limit with both hands on the wheel. Her phone rang. She glanced at the mount. Kiamaka. She picked up on speaker. Chica. Ada, you driving? Just coming through Grey County. Her sister went quiet for a moment. That road? Yeah. You okay? She looked at the empty shoulder, at the birch trees, at the flat gray line of highway running straight to the horizon. I'm okay. Jamaka said, I read the sentencing report. Yemi sent it to me, all of it. I told her not to do that. She laughed. She said you'd say that. A pause. The kind of pause that holds something heavy and has learned, over time, how to hold it without spilling. Mama used to drive this road, Kiamaka said. You know that? Before we moved. She used to take it to get to Aunt Ngozi's place. She said she always felt watched on it. She couldn't explain it. She just felt watched. Adaze gripped the wheel. I know. I'm glad you did what you did. I'm glad it was you who drove that road that night. She didn't answer right away. She watched the fields pass. She thought about Bernard Asante, who had sent a card to her office 3 weeks after the sentencing. Handwritten. 2 lines. Thank you for doing what nobody did for 6 years. My mother passed in January, but I was there every week at the end. I could afford to go. She thought about the 44, 12 of whom had already received restitution checks, the rest being processed. Some of them had moved, changed their routes. Some of them had stopped driving that corridor years ago and never said why to anyone. All of them had been called. All of them had been told, "We have your name." Someone kept your name. She thought about Taves, somewhere in the province, working a job with no uniform, carrying what he carried. She thought about Brock, waiting for a trial date in a house from which the OPP insignia on the driveway gate had, according to a local reporter, been quietly removed. She thought about Merritt, cell in a federal facility, no road, no gray mustache catching the light of a radar gun, just time. "Come home," Kiyamaka said. "There's food." "I'm 20 minutes out." She hung up. A car passed her going the other direction. A dark green sedan, a black man behind the wheel, alone, both hands on the steering wheel, eyes forward. He didn't look at her. He was just driving. He just drove. The way it was always supposed to be. I keep thinking about the rain. Not the handcuffs, not the courtroom, not the number 14 printed on a sentencing document. The rain on Highway 26 on a Friday evening in October, and a woman standing on a gravel shoulder watching her own belongings get handled by someone who had decided, before he ever reached her window, that she had no power to do anything about it. He was right about almost everyone else he'd stopped. That's the part that stays with me. Gary Merritt didn't make a mistake in his logic. He made a mistake in his target. For 11 years, the logic had worked perfectly. He knew that most people he pulled over on that road were exhausted, alone, far from anyone who could help, and afraid of what happened if they pushed back against a badge in a county where everyone knew his name. He knew the complaints would land on Howard Brock's desk and go nowhere. He knew the system was arranged, quietly and efficiently, to protect him, and he used all of that knowledge to take money from people who had done nothing wrong and send them back onto the highway with a misspelled receipt and a warning not to return. That's not ignorance. That's intelligence being used in the service of something rotten. And I think that distinction matters, because we sometimes comfort ourselves by calling people like Merritt stupid or careless. He wasn't. He was careful. He was methodical. He ran that operation for 11 years without a significant consequence. What he lacked wasn't intelligence. It was any sense of obligation to the people he was supposed to serve. That absence, that particular emptiness where conscience should be, is what made everything else possible. And then there's Bernard Asante. Bernard, who drove that road every week to sit with a mother who was losing herself slowly to dementia, who filed complaints after both times Merritt took his money, who told his MP's office and a lawyer and anyone who would listen, and who stopped going as often because he couldn't afford the gas anymore. Bernard didn't lack intelligence either. He knew exactly what had happened to him. He had the receipts, literally. What he lacked was the institutional weight to make anyone act on what he knew. That gap between knowing something is wrong and having the means to do something about it is where I think the real story lives. Daisy had both. She had the clarity to recognize what Merritt was doing while it was happening, and she had the tools and the title and the 11 minutes on the side of that road to set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. She didn't panic. She didn't bargain. She picked up her license off the wet gravel, got back in her car, and started building a case. I find myself returning to that image when I think about what it actually takes to hold people accountable. It's not just anger. Anger is easy, and it runs out. What Adeze had was something steadier, the kind of moral clarity that knows the difference between what is happening and what is supposed to happen, and refuses to let that gap close quietly, and the discipline to channel it into something that lasts longer than the moment. 44 people got their names in a file that mattered. Bernard was at his mother's side every week at the end. A new sign stands at the county line. None of that happens without someone willing to kneel on the gravel, pick up what was dropped, and then get to work. That's the part I can't let go of.